Edward IV was considered incredibly dashing and handsome when he took the throne of England from his cousin at just 18 years old during the Wars of the Roses. He was tall and stood at 6'4". He dressed well and was impressive to all he came across. Everyone was interested in who the new king was going to marry. The person he would choose to be his bride could either make or break the strength of his reign. So when it was announced that he had married Elizabeth WoodVille in a secret ceremony that very few people attended, it shocked both Christendom and the court. Elizabeth was a widow, already had children, had no real wealth of her own, and the man who was previously her husband had actually fought against Edward IV in the Wars of the Roses. But Elizabeth WoodVille was not the only person Edward had married in secret. There was another secret Queen of England, Eleanor Talbot. Eleanor Talbot was only 13 when she married her first husband, Sir Thomas Butler, who was 28. Eleanor came from an illustrious background. Her father was one of the most well-known and feared commanders for the English during the 100 Years' War, and she was the niece of the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. Her new husband, Thomas's father, was also important. He was the Lord High Treasurer of England and had also fought in the 100 Years' War and was captain of Calais and was even at the execution of Joan of Arc. Thomas's father was eventually given the title Baron of Sudeley by Henry VI, and he used the money he had made during the 100 Years' War to rebuild Sudeley Castle. Thomas continued to serve the Lancasters like both his father and his father-in-law and fought in the Wars of the Roses. He ended up perishing while fighting. Eleanor and Thomas had been given Sudeley Castle as part of their marriage arrangement, but when Thomas died, his father took back Sudeley Castle, and Eleanor, then in her early 20s, continued to live with her father-in-law there. Eleanor was said to have been incredibly beautiful, and sometime after Thomas died, she is said to have caught the eye of Edward IV. Much like the story of Elizabeth WoodVille, it is alleged that Edward married Eleanor in secret. Edward eventually lost interest in Eleanor. She then, very quietly, decided to join a Carmelite community and withdraw from public life. She died at the age of 34. It would be 15 years before Edward IV would die unexpectedly, leaving his 12-year-old son, also named Edward, next in line to the throne, and his brother Richard as protector of the young boy and the realm. Richard would eventually claim that all of the children Edward had had with Elizabeth WoodVille were illegitimate because he was previously pre-contracted to marry Eleanor Talbot. A bill in Parliament was passed called Titulus Regius and made Richard the next in line to the throne. None of Eleanor Talbot's relatives nor her former husband's relatives came forward or were requested to come forward to protest against Richard's claims, and none gave any evidence that they were untrue. Richard III became king, and 2 years later, he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth, and Henry VII became king. Henry VII married Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of Edward IV and Elizabeth WoodVille. He immediately repealed Titulus Regius and ordered that every copy and every relating document be destroyed. Eleanor Talbot and her story all but disappeared. No one knew who Edward's legitimate wife was supposed to have been. Thomas More thought it had been one of Edward's mistresses. 100 years later, a transcribed copy of Titulus Regius was found in the Benedictine Abbey of Croyland by a man named Sir George Buck. Historians still argue about if Edward really did marry Eleanor Talbot. But had the transcribed document not been found, we might never have known about Eleanor at all.